Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. In this brief audio presentation, we're going to talk about opportunities. First, we'll talk about what an opportunity actually is, and then the types of opportunities. We'll talk about the distinction between the discovery of opportunities and the creation of opportunities. And then we'll talk about finding them and the process of getting from an idea to an opportunity. So, this first key question we'd like to ask is what an opportunity is to begin with. The way I like to think about it is that an opportunity is a unique set of circumstances. So there has to be an observer, someone who is thinking about the situation and looking for or planning to build this set of circumstances into a mechanism for change. There has to be some level of novelty, something that other people haven't seen or something new that hasn't been utilized before, and then a broader context in which there's value to be created and captured. The textbook talks about three elements. One, the potential economic value. Clearly that's specific to business. There's many other kinds of value that could be associated with an opportunity. Social value, human value, ecological value. Just depends on the context in which you're trying to create change. The second item, again, is this element of novelty or newness. And the third one is perceived desirability. So this is a little less obvious because at the start, the perceived desirability is probably on the part of the inventor or observer or entrepreneur. And it's important to remember that while that's a good starting point, ultimately that's got to be translated into perceived desirability from customers. In the end, it doesn't matter how desirable you think the opportunity is. All that matters is how desirable the product or solution or transaction is to the people that you're interacting with. So the book talks about four types of opportunities based on two characteristics: how valuable or useful the opportunity or innovation is, and the degree of novelty associated with this. This is a relatively simplistic categorization, but it's kind of a nice starting point. And so then, based on that, we can take a look at these four different types of innovations from or opportunities, which range from irrelevant, when there's low novelty and low usefulness, to an improvement, which is basically an incremental change. So it's low on the novelty side, but it still has some good amount of value or usefulness to you. To an invention where there's a lot of novelty, but ultimately not that much value that can be created. And then what we call an innovation, where there's a lot of novelty and a lot of value potential. Again, remember that while we probably are going to start out evaluating this ourselves, ultimately we need to make sure that we transition to the context of the customer and the market. It does not matter how innovative you think your idea is or how good you think the opportunity is, if the customers and markets have no interest in it. So another key aspect of thinking about opportunities is the distinction between discovering and creating opportunities. Now, this might seem a little more academic, and this is something that really gets debated a lot in academic circles, but I do think it's useful to recognize this distinction. In the discovery theory of opportunity, which is very economic in nature, going back to Schumpeter, at least to Schumpeter, if not earlier. The argument is that all the possible opportunities are pretty clearly out there, and it's just a question of finding them, right? So what distinguishes people who develop really great opportunities are the ones who have really good search mechanisms, right? So they're scanning the environment, they can look at the risks that are associated with an opportunity, and they can take a calculated risk in order to decide whether to work on it or not. And that's a very economically oriented perspective, and it has a lot of value to it because we do see lots of situations where people scan the environment, find an opportunity, and pursue it. But in the last 20 to 25 years, a new approach to thinking about entrepreneurship has been developed called the creation framework. And the idea here is that there's a lot more uncertainty, and simply scanning the environment won't reveal where real opportunities are. That you need a lot more direct experience in order to be able to develop really interesting opportunities. And in fact, your job isn't to scan the environment. Your job is to take action early, to create incrementally developed versions of your innovation or your product or solution and get them in front of customers as quickly as possible. And based on the feedback you get, modify your idea until it's really viable. This is sometimes referred to as effectuation or a design framework. I suspect that these two are not quite as far apart as perhaps some scholars would like to believe, but it's useful to recognize that they both have a part. I think it does make sense to look for opportunities, of course, but it also makes sense to take action as early as possible to test your assumptions. So based on this, there are then three mechanisms for finding opportunities. If we're operating purely in a discovery framework, then our mechanism is alertness. Are we paying attention? Are we looking for change? Are we recognizing trends? Do we see how customer interests have evolved over time? So this is this finding approach. And if we see what's going on in the broader environment, then we can potentially identify opportunities. This was sort of a framework also referred to as like a megatrends perspective back in, I think, the 80s and the 90s, where you could look at these large-scale socio-demographic changes and then recognize where opportunities were likely to emerge. Within the creation or building framework, there are two key points two key mechanisms. The first one is that prior knowledge and experience makes a difference. And this can be linked to research by Scott Shane, for example, and many of his colleagues. And that the more direct knowledge and experience you have in a given field, the more likely you are to be able to develop a new opportunity because of your familiarity. And the second element of it is then pattern recognition, which can be attributed to a number of scholars, but Bygrave and Hofer probably a good example, in which that knowledge and experience allows you to recognize patterns as they're emerging and to then fit what you are interested in, what your innovation ideas are, into those patterns, and to then present innovations and ideas and products and solutions to customers that they can give you relevant feedback on. Again, I think all of these are appropriate and probably linked together in the development of really interesting opportunities, but it's useful to recognize how they can be distinguished. Here's the thing. Opportunities don't emerge immediately, and ideas are not inherently opportunities, right? So an idea is fundamentally valueless. Everybody has ideas all the time, and an idea really just exists in thought. The only way to protect an idea would be to keep it secret, which by definition means it's not an opportunity. Entrepreneurs take ideas and they make them substantive. That is, they convert them from something that just exists in your brain into something that can actually be shared with others, socialized, and acted on, so that you can generate a product or a solution or some type of transaction that's ultimately going to create value. There are a number of ways to explore opportunities. Your book talks about the IDEATE model, which has these different elements in it: identify, discover, enhance, anticipate, target, and evaluate. And I don't think that entrepreneurs generally go through these in a linear way, one by one, but I think it's useful to recognize all of these pieces as being appropriate stages in opportunity exploration. That is, there again, as this is a method, right? Not necessarily a linear process, but a method in which entrepreneurs are taking the information that they've developed, the ideas they have, the experience and knowledge that they bring to the table, their passion for the opportunity, and they evaluate those against the information that's available to them from the market. So observing customers, looking for what we call problem-rich environments, that is, where there is change taking place, looking for innovative approaches to solving problems, making an effort to be very focused and targeted in where we can solve a problem, and then evaluating how all these things fit together to see whether this opportunity is really interesting or not. it's really useful then to think about opportunity exploration as a funnel rather than a road, right? And so sometimes we use the road analogy, and of course we often talk about the resource of Mullen's New Business Road Test as a way of evaluating opportunities, and I think that those are appropriate. But realistically, the odds are you're going to address dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of ideas before you really find something valuable. One of the real dangers for entrepreneurs, a trap that I personally have seen many, many times, is where an entrepreneur falls in love with their first idea. And maybe it's not the first one. Maybe they have 5 ideas or 10 ideas or 50 ideas, but they fall in love with one of them. Once you've fallen in love with the idea, it's too late to evaluate it objectively. And I've seen that so many times where entrepreneurs are presented with data showing that the opportunity is not really that good, but they're no longer able to see it because their passion has taken over and they can't even use the data anymore as part of their analysis. Here's the bottom line when it comes to opportunities. They're not all equally attractive. Some entrepreneurs will evaluate many opportunities that target specific goals. For example, an entrepreneur might say, I want to have positive ecological impact via renewable energy opportunities. And they do that before they initiate any commercial work. And so they have a specific outcome that they're looking for, and they're willing to find the right technological solution that can be commercially viable. But many entrepreneurs settle on an opportunity before they've evaluated it, often because they've had an innovation or they've had a business model idea and they fall in love with it. Even in those situations, I think that entrepreneurs have a responsibility to evaluate it as best they can so that they're aware of the challenge that lies ahead. Go into these kinds of things eyes open. Sure, it might turn out that it's going to be more challenging and less attractive than you originally thought. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go after it. It just means you need to recognize what the limitations of the opportunity are really going to be. And this is this element of self-honesty and appraisal that I think is very important for entrepreneurs. And I encourage you, whether you're being entrepreneurial in a new venture context or for a corporation or a government or an NGO, to keep this in mind as you think about the new opportunities that you uncover along your own path.